Hey guys, it's Alex with Hammond Watch. I'm here today with the Tissot Heritage 165th Anniversary Special Edition. It's a manually wound Petite Seconds watch, and I think it's incredibly handsome. When these were released, they certainly caught my eye, but with a retail price around $1,000, I wanted to wait for them to hit the gray market and then really kind of find their bottom dollar. And I feel like we've kind of approached that at this point, so I went ahead and picked one up, and I wanted to share it with you today. The sizing on this is something I want to cover first. It is kind of a large watch. It's 42 millimeters, which may not sound that big, but without having any type of bezel, it's just a lot of dial space. So once you put it on wrist, it does have the visual appearance of something that's much larger. You have a thickness of 11.85. But a lot of that is the crystal. If you exclude the crystal, you're looking at right about 9 millimeters thick. You have a very nice signed 6.5 millimeter crown. It is just push-pull, so only 50 meters of water resistance. But with a watch this style, I think that's certainly forgivable. One of the more surprising measurements when I was going through the watch was the lug tip to lug tip. You're looking at about 52.25 millimeters. If you bring the strap in and try to get that effective lug to lug, you're looking a lot closer to 50 millimeters. So it's certainly passable as far as comfort's concerned. But I know that 50 millimeter mark on the lug tip to lug tip can be a deciding factor for some with smaller wrists. Also, there's a 20 millimeter lug width, which Tissot does this quite a bit. You know, I've bought some of their divers in the past that were 42, 43 millimeters, and they had a smaller, 20 millimeter strap size. I think it's forgivable on this watch. It's just not my preference. This is one of the few instances where I would have even been okay with going 21, just something a little bit bigger to match, just kind of the visual size of the piece. That said, it's not a huge concern. The strap that came on this watch stock, I think is probably one of the highlights for me. I really like it. The 20 millimeters tapers down to 18. It's got a nice kind of muted yet rich brown color. And as I was unboxing the watch, you got that kind of leather workshop smell. A lot of times you don't get that particular sensation with a leather strap, but it just feels like a nicer quality. Very pliable, it was comfortable out of the box, and I really didn't have any issues conforming to my wrist, which is nice because I have a pretty wide flat wrist, and it can make it a bit tricky when straps are really stiff and take time to really break in. So tapers down to 18, and then we jump back up to 24.35 for the push button deployant. It works well. It engages nicely. My only problem with it is that I don't know that the finish necessarily matches the rest of the watch. It's more of a satin finish where you get a little bit more just vertical brushing, so it's kind of its own thing. Also, one of the bigger negatives of the watch to me is the Tissot logo here on the clasp. Not that I don't enjoy that kind of 1930s Tissot logo. It's just got some hot spots in it. It's pretty sharp. It's not something that you touch frequently, so it may not bother you. But it's certainly something to note. If you run your finger across, you feel it catching at multiple points in that logo. I did also want to note that this deployment mechanism doesn't really have like a flip up point on this particular side. So as you insert the strap, you kind of have to find the area where it'll squeak through, and you can feel it kind of scratching the strap, both on the sides and this piece as you go. It's not a huge concern. It's not causing significant damage, but if you're switching this frequently, you will start to see wear pretty quickly. I don't think it's anything that's going to be structural for quite some time, but it is a little bit annoying. Behind the watch's sapphire display caseback, you'll see the ETA 6498-1. It's a Unitest movement, so it's essentially an old pocket watch movement. Very widely used, very robust. You get a nice 53-hour power reserve. Although it's not the quickest running movement, it beats at 18,800 vibrations per hour. There is a 6498-2 that beats at $21,600, but this is the more affordable option, which makes sense all things considered. Around the outside of this case back, you'll see basic specifications referencing Tissot, the water resistance, and of course the 165th anniversary. So being an old pocket watch movement, you get a very nice satisfying wind, an audible click, very nice tactile feel, and as you approach fully wound, you'll feel the crown actually start to firm up. It's my preference, as soon as I start to feel that the crown firming up, to just stop, because if the watch actually comes to a stop, it really doesn't matter. There's no date function, so setting the time is extremely easy. There's no ghost date either. There's only one engagement point with the crown, and that is for actually setting the time. You'll also notice that it is not a hacking movement, so precise timekeeping isn't necessarily the point of this particular offering. The dial is certainly the star of the show here, and there's a very nice vertical brush. It's pretty rich and plays with the light. You can't necessarily see it in studio lighting, but it is phenomenal. There's a little bit of difference in the texture of the small seconds, which I think adds a nice contrast. And although you may not be able to see it, the hands actually appear to be like a gold tone with black paint on the top. And what that does is light kind of comes in and hits the side and reflects on the underside, and it gives this little bit of a gold hue to the dial overall. It reminds me a lot of, I have a 1601 Datejust, and it's a silver dial, but there's a tiny bit of patina, and when the light hits it, there's just this little hue of kind of gold that shines through and pops. It's very nice, very vintage inspired, and I think they knocked it out of the park. No luminescence anywhere on the dial, as this is meant to be more of a dress watch, although it's really kind of casual and laid back. I think it's pretty versatile as long as you're not going to be doing any activities where water is going to come into play. Here we are in my 7.5 to 7 3/4 inch wrist. The watch certainly has a big footprint, but at the same time it's very wearable. The lugs aren't overhanging at all. It sits nice and thin. I'm only about halfway through the strap, so there is room to go up or down, although if I had a 7-inch wrist, I think this might be a little bit tricky, just given the overall length. So a couple of my favorite things about the watch, really like the dial and that kind of 1930s Tissot logo. I think overall aesthetically it's very nice. Really like the finishing. You're polished on all of the top surfaces, with a nice vertical brushing along each side and in between the lugs. My only real complaint with the watch is that you do get some hot spots. Obviously we talked about the clasp, but also right here on the tip of this lug you can feel just a little bit of a sharp point. It's not anything that's going to touch your skin and that you're going to notice while wearing. But just after spending some time with the watch and kind of running my hands over it quite a bit, you certainly notice that it snags a little bit right here. But all things considered, I don't think it's a really big deal. So let's talk about the pricing really quick. Retail just under $1,000, but you can now pick these up from gray market dealers like Joma Shop for just under $400 USD. At that price point, I think it's a really compelling offering. Almost like a poor man's Longines Heritage 1945. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just think it's obviously an easy way to convey the point. The Longines has a nicer dial and case finishing and a nicer movement with the 2895. But the case back comes off a little bit cheap, whereas on this one you get that really nice display at that manual movement. I really do also love this boxed crystal or domed. I'm not really sure which one it would be classified as, but it's got a nice AR coating to it as well. When you're out and about, you can see just the slightest blue hue, so it would appear it's only on the underside. I think it's a very nice touch, and all things considered, a very compelling value. I think it also is a very nice kind of modern interpretation of the old Omega reference 2338. I do happen to have one in hand, but you can see side by side, very similar designs and layouts. Both manually wound, both have the domed crystal, although you're looking at acrylic versus sapphire, and obviously a more modern size on the Tissot. So it's just a more wearable, modern, kind of everyday variant of what to me is a very classic Omega. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you have, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Both really help in YouTube's analytics. I try to put watch content out weekly, and I hope to see you in the next one.